Welcome to Reformed Thinking. So, how do you know the Bible sitting on your desk actually contains the words penned by, apostles from thousands of years ago?
Yeah, that is the big question, isn't it? Because we don't have the original papyrus.
Right, nobody does. Instead, we have this, massive, murky landscape of thousands of ancient copies, and, well, they do not all match.
Yeah, they definitely don't match.
So today, we're stepping into this incredible detective story that spans centuries, continents, and, thousands of ancient manuscripts. The mission for today's deep dive is to find out how human errors, ink-stained hands, and just really tired scribes actually preserved a divine text. We are plunging into a stack of scholarly documents all about New Testament textual criticism.
And the overarching argument across these documents is pretty striking, honestly. The premise is that God preserved the biblical text, but not by dropping a flawless golden book down from heaven.
Which is what I think a lot of people secretly assume happened.
Oh, for sure. But instead, preservation happened through the beautiful, flawed, and entirely human reality of copyists and scribes, all of it guided by divine providence. We are looking at a very analog history here.
Yeah, analog's a good word for it. Because if you think about, say, a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of total precision. You break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, and the doctor points at it, broken or not broken.
Right. It's binary.
But when you step into the world of historical documents, that x-ray machine is just useless. We are looking at a living history. So before we look at the physical manuscripts themselves, we have to understand the philosophical frameworks people use when they approach them.
Which is crucial, yeah.
Because when a college student, or anyone for that matter, when they first realize that we don't have the original autographs, the actual pieces of papyrus Paul or John signed, and that the thousands of copies we do have contain variations, they tend to panic.
Oh, full panic mode. And that panic usually throws them into one of two ditches. The reaction to manuscript variants, well, it usually swings to one of two extreme positions.
Let's talk about that first ditch.
Yeah. On the left side, the documents describe a framework of liberal skepticism. This is basically the ditch of naturalistic despair.
Naturalistic despair.
Wow, it's a bleak view. A prime example brought up in the research is modern scholar Bart Ehrman. Decades ago, Ehrman actually co-authored a landmark textbook on this subject with the legendary Bruce Metzger.
Oh, Metzger's like the gold standard for this stuff.
He is. And while Metzger approached textual criticism with scholarly reverence and a strong belief in the text's stability, Ehrman took a drastically different path. Over time, he descended into this sort of skeptical agnosticism.
And the logic there, if I'm tracking, assumes that because scribes made errors and because we can occasionally spot intentional alterations made by those scribes, the original wording is just lost beyond recovery.
That is the assumption, yeah.
It treats the text as a purely human artifact, subject to the same total decay as any other ancient book from antiquity. Like, the transmission process is so corrupted that we can never recover the true voice of the apostles.
Spot on. That viewpoint completely ignores any concept of supernatural providence. It views the Bible purely through a secular, naturalistic lens. But then, on the right side of the road, you have the opposite ditch.
Right, the other extreme.
The research calls this mechanical dogmatism. This group includes movements like King James Onlyism and the majority text movement. People in this camp, they react to the panic of variations by picking one specific late secondary text type known as the Byzantine text and declaring it absolutely infallible.
And the primary argument is based on sheer numbers, isn't it?
Right.
Because the vast majority of surviving Greek manuscripts are of this Byzantine type. They argue the sheer volume proves it must be the original.
Yes, it's a majoritarian argument.
But think about this analogy. Imagine you're working in an office, and one person writes a typo in an email. 1,000 people then hit forward on that email over the next week.
I love this analogy.
Right, because the sheer volume of forwards does not magically turn the typo into the original truth. Counting manuscripts is a fundamentally flawed metric. Manuscripts must be weighed, not just counted.
That analogy captures the fundamental error of the dogmatic approach so well. Counting manuscripts rather than weighing their historical and genealogical value, well, it just ignores the historical reality of how texts were actually copied and distributed.
It ignores centuries of scribal polishing.
Absolutely. So, to avoid both the despair of the skeptics and the blind traditionalism of the dogmatists, the scholars point us to a confessional middle ground.
And for historic Protestant thought, that framework is laid out in the Westminster Confession, specifically Chapter 1, Section 8.
Yes, that establishes a brilliant theological lens for this historical work. The belief is that God's singular care and providence kept the text pure in all ages through secondary, ordinary means.
Ordinary means meaning the scribes.
Right. The original text was immediately inspired, but its preservation relied on ordinary human copyists. This means the existence of variants is not some failure of divine providence.
This is not a crisis.
Not at all. Instead, it is a call for scholars to act as diligent stewards, carefully sweeping away the historical dust that has settled on the text over millennia.
Wait, so if we are called to be stewards and we have to weigh the evidence rather than just count the copies, what is the actual metric for doing so? Like, how do you weigh a manuscript?
That brings up a concept the research calls the golden rule of textual evaluation.
The golden rule. Okay, lay it on me.
The golden rule is a fundamental maxim that governs the entire discipline. It states, choose the reading that best explains the origin of the others.
Choose the reading that best explains the origin of the others.
Right. It relies on basic logic. When you look at two different readings in a manuscript, you ask yourself which one of these logically gave birth to the other. Scribes did not make mistakes in a vacuum. Their errors followed very predictable psychological and visual patterns.
The research provides 3 incredibly vivid secular analogies to show how these clerical errors happen. I love these because they take theology entirely out of the equation and just show human nature. Bring up that first analogy regarding John Bunyan.
Oh, this one is great. So the first analogy involves John Bunyan's classic 17th century book, Pilgrim's Progress. In the famous scene where Christian escapes from Doubting Castle, early editions diverge on a specific phrase.
Okay.
One early edition reads, "The lock went desperately hard," but another edition reads, "The lock went damnable hard."
Now, applying the golden rule, we ask you, the listener, to think this through. Did John Bunyan write desperately, and then some later editor decided to spice things up and change it to damnable?
Not a chance. Bunyan, writing in the robust English of his era, used damnable in a non-profane, intensive sense. It just meant the lock was extremely difficult.
Right, it wasn't a swear word to him.
Right. But later editors, worried about offending pious readers with what sounded like a coarse curse word, they smoothed it out to the much more polite desperately. The harder, more offensive word explains the origin of the smoother word.
Because no editor would invent a harsh word to replace a smooth one.
Yes. But they would absolutely invent a smooth word to replace a harsh one.
That makes total sense. We can see the psychological motivation of the editor right there. Okay, the second analogy is fantastic. This one is about the word dord. In the 1934 unabridged Webster's Dictionary, there was an entry for a noun spelled D-O-R-D, meaning density.
Yeah, and for over a decade, this absolute ghost word just sat in the dictionary. It was purely a clerical scribal error.
How did that even happen at that level of publishing?
Well, an editor had originally submitted a tiny slip of paper that read D period, or lowercase d period, meant as a proposed abbreviation for the word density in physics and chemistry.
Oh, I see. D or D.
Right. But a copyist completely missed the periods, ran all the letters together, mistook the abbreviation for a single word, and classified it as a noun.
So you have a completely fabricated word sitting in a major dictionary for years. That perfectly illustrates a major danger in ancient Greek manuscripts, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. Ancient Greek was primarily written in a style called scriptio continua, which means all the letters were run together without spaces or punctuation.
Just a massive block of letters.
Just a wall of text. If you can imagine reading an entire book in English where every single letter touches the next, you start to understand the difficulty. There's a classic example in English, the letters G-O-D-I-S-N-O-W-H-E-R-E.
Depending on where you mentally place the space, it either reads, God is now here, or God is nowhere.
Right. You can easily imagine a tired scribe looking at a block of ancient Greek text and mistaking abbreviations, or accidentally combining the end of one word with the beginning of another to create an entirely new, incorrect word.
The physical strain on these scribes must have been immense.
Oh, terrible.
The third secular analogy is about the German novelist Thomas Mann. In a 1939 biographical dictionary, his name was listed in bold print as Mann, Thomas Schrift.
And in later editions, the word Schrift mysteriously vanished. The solution becomes obvious when you look at German biographical volumes. Schrift is the standard abbreviation for Schriftsteller, which is the German word for awful.
So an American editor compiling the dictionary misunderstood the abbreviation for his occupation as his middle name, and just copy it right into the main text.
Yeah, just plopped it right in there as a middle name.
It is so easy to see how a scribe copying a biblical manuscript might do the exact same thing. Imagine a scribe reading a manuscript and, like a previous owner, had written a helpful, clarifying note in the margin.
Oh, that happened constantly.
Right. The scribe comes along, sees the note, assumes it was part of the actual text that had accidentally been left out by the previous copyist, and just inserts that note directly into the main sentence.
By understanding these human tendencies, smoothing out offensive or difficult words, running letters together due to visual fatigue, and pulling marginal notes into the text out of an abundance of caution, the textual critic can begin to separate the pure stream of the original writing from the muddy tributaries of human blunders.
So, if that is the psychology behind the mistakes, we have to look at how those mistakes multiplied across the globe into distinct families. This brings us to what the scholars call external evidence. If you have thousands of manuscripts, how do you even organize them?
You organize them genealogically. When we talk about weighing witnesses rather than counting them, we are talking about finding their family tree. Scribes copied from master copies, called exemplars, and over time, distinct families or text types emerged in different geographical regions of the ancient world.
The documents break these down into 4 main genealogical groups, right?
Yes.
Let's start with the one we mentioned earlier, the Byzantine text type. This is the family that dogmatists love so much.
Also known as the coin text, yeah. This family represents the vast majority of late paper manuscripts. It eventually became the standard text of the Greek Orthodox Church and formed the basis of the punted Textus Receptus.
Which the King James Version was translated from.
Correct.
I am assuming the text the King James is based on must be the oldest and most accurate if it became the standard, right? That's what most people would think.
That is a very common assumption, but the historical evidence points the other way. The Byzantine text is heavily polished. The scribes who produced this text in the later centuries smoothed out grammatical irregularities. They also had a strong tendency to conflate readings.
Inflate them, like mash them together.
Basically, yeah. If a scribe had 2 manuscripts in front of him with different readings for a single verse, instead of doing the hard work of choosing one, he would often combine them both to ensure nothing was lost.
Ah, covering his bases.
Right. It is a secondary polished revision that did not fully stabilize until the 4th or 5th century. It is smooth, but it is a generation or 2 removed from the raw original.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose the sheer volume comes from the stability of the Byzantine Empire compared to the rest of the world at that time.
Yes, they had the infrastructure to just mass produce these.
Okay, the second family is the Western text type.
This one is ancient, dating back to the 2nd century, and is represented heavily by Codex Bezae and the Old Latin versions. But antiquity does not always guarantee purity.
How so?
Well, the Western text is notoriously wild and paraphrastic. The scribes in this tradition took immense liberties. They acted more like editors than copyists, adding historical details, expanding on narratives, and constantly trying to harmonize different passages to make the stories match perfectly.
So they were trying to fix perceived contradictions on the fly.
Yeah, it grew in a very undisciplined way in the western regions of the early church.
Interesting. Then we have the Caesarean text type, which sounds like a bit of a hybrid.
It really is a mixed, intermediate text that blends readings from the Wild Western family and the strict Alexandrian family. Scholars note it developed in stages, starting with a pre-Caesarean form seen in documents like Papyrus 45, before becoming the Caesarean proper.
And what was their goal with this hybrid?
It reflects a conscious editorial effort to make the text elegant and suitable for public reading in church settings.
Wait, so if the Byzantine scribes were polishing the text, the Western scribes were going rogue and adding historical flavor, and the Caesareans were trying to make a hybrid compromise, who was actually keeping the raw, unedited version safe?
That brings us to the 4th family, the Alexandrian text type. The documents call this the gold standard. Early scholars like Westcott and Hort referred to it as the neutral text. This text type was prepared in Alexandria, Egypt.
Alexandria was a massive academic center in the ancient world, right? They had the great library.
Right on the money. The scribes there were highly trained professionals, accustomed to handling classical literature with immense rigor. The Alexandrian text is characterized by strict brevity and a faithful preservation of difficult, awkward grammar.
So they didn't try to fix it?
No, they did not try to fix the text. They just copied what was in front of them, even if it sounded harsh or weird.
And we have major physical evidence for this family because of the climate, correct?
Yes, massive evidence. The dry sands of Egypt preserved papyrus brilliantly. We have early papyri like Papyrus 75 and Papyrus 66 dating to the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries. This proves the Alexandrian text goes back to an archetype from mere decades after the original autographs were penned.
That is astonishingly close to the source.
It is. We also have the great 4th century codices, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Conservative scholars universally recognize this family as the most ancient and reliable witness to the original words.
Now, I have to push back here for a second on behalf of the listener, because is it not totally counterintuitive that the most accurate, reliable texts are often the ones with the harshest, briefest, and least polished Greek? You would think the Word of God would be grammatically pristine.
That is a very natural assumption, but it completely misunderstands the human element of transmission. Scribes naturally wanted to fix irregularities. They wanted the text to sound eloquent and correct.
Right, they want to honor it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yes, that is their motivation. Therefore, when you find a manuscript with unpolished, blunt, difficult Greek, you are almost always looking at a text that has not been subjected to centuries of editorial smoothing.
So the raw, difficult version is closer to the original because nobody would invent a difficult reading to replace a smooth one.
Yes. The roughness is the fingerprint of authenticity.
The roughness is a sign of authenticity. I love that. So once we have the physical manuscripts sorted by their family trees using this external evidence, we have to examine the actual words on the page. We have to look at the internal evidence.
Internal evidence is divided into 2 categories. First, you have transcriptional probabilities, which analyze what the scribe was likely to do. Second, you have intrinsic probabilities, which analyze what the original author was likely to write.
Let's unpack the scientific rules critics use to guess scribal behavior. If you are copying a book by hand, you develop certain habits. The first major rule is a Latin phrase, lectio difficilior potior.
If you are copying a book and you hit a sentence that makes 0 grammatical sense, what are you tempted to do?
Honestly, I would probably try to fix it so it reads smoothly or just assume the guy before me made a typo.
That human instinct is the basis of this rule. Lectio difficilior potior means the more difficult reading is preferred. Scribes would often alter a harsh grammatical construction, a rare vocabulary word, or a difficult theological statement into something simpler and more familiar.
So the reading that puzzled the scribe is highly likely to be the original.
Yes.
And the second rule is lectio brevior potior.
The shorter reading is preferred. As we saw with the Byzantine text, scribes were far more prone to add things than to take them away. They added explanatory details, pronouns, pious glosses, and conjunctions to make the text flow better or to clarify a theological point.
But there is a major, fascinating exception to this shorter is better rule. Sometimes the shorter reading is just a massive accident caused by eye slip. The technical term is parablepsis, caused by homoteluton, which means similar endings.
Oh, this is such a common mistake. This requires visualizing the physical environment of a scriptorium. Picture a scribe working by flickering candlelight. He has been copying Greek for 10 hours straight. His hand aches.
Sounds miserable.
It really was. He looks at a word ending in the letters OS, looks over at his blank parchment, writes the word, then looks back at the source text.
But instead of finding his exact place, he spots another word ending in OS 3 lines down and just continues from there.
Yeah.
Like he accidentally deletes a whole paragraph just because the letters rhymed visually.
That is precisely how it happens. So, if a critic sees a shorter reading in a manuscript, they cannot just blindly apply the shorter is better rule.
They have to check the context.
Right, they have to carefully check the Greek syntax of the longer manuscripts to see if the missing words are bracketed by similar endings. If they are, the shorter reading is a visual mistake, not the original text.
Here's where the detective work gets really sophisticated. Beyond what the scribe did, we also have to consider the intrinsic probabilities, meaning the mind of the original author.
The critic asks, what was Paul or Peter or John actually likely to write? This requires deep familiarity with the author's unique vocabulary, their specific style, and the logical flow of their theological argument in that specific letter.
So you are balancing the predictable habits of a weary scribe against the brilliant mind of the author to pierce through the transmission history.
Yes, it is a delicate balance.
Let's take these rules out of the laboratory and apply them to actual famous verses in the New Testament. The documents highlight several case studies that show this in action. Let's start with Acts chapter 6, verse 8. There is a textual variant describing Stephen. Some manuscripts say he was full of grace, and others say he was full of faith.
Right. If we look at the immediate context, Stephen is described in nearby verses using the word faith. Knowing that scribes had a strong psychological tendency toward harmonization, making everything match, it is highly probable that later scribes saw the word grace and subconsciously altered it to faith, so that it would match the surrounding descriptions of Stephen.
So the reading grace explains the origin of faith. Therefore, grace is the original.
Spot on.
Then we have a massive one that always catches people off guard. The ending of the Gospel of Mark. Anyone reading a modern Bible will notice brackets around Mark chapter 16, verses 9 through 20.
This is a classic example of both external and internal evidence converging beautifully. Externally, the earliest and most reliable manuscripts, the Alexandrian codices we discussed earlier, end Mark abruptly at verse 8.
Just stopping with the women fleeing the empty tomb in absolute terror.
Right. And internally, this abrupt ending is extremely jarring, but it perfectly fits the fast-paced, breathless style of Mark's entire gospel. He constantly uses the word immediately and rushes from scene to scene.
But later readers absolutely hated that sudden stop. They wanted a neat resolution.
They really did. The abrupt stop felt so uncomfortable that later scribes added conventional summaries of resurrection appearances, pulling details from Matthew and Luke to wrap up the narrative neatly.
So the shorter, jarring reading is authentic, and the longer, smooth ending is a later addition.
That is the scholarly consensus, yes.
Another famous passage is John 7:53 through 8:11, the famous story of the woman caught in adultery.
This is a beloved story. It may very well be a true ancient tradition about Jesus, but the manuscript evidence shows it literally floating around.
Floating around.
Yeah, it appears in completely different locations in various manuscripts. Sometimes you find it after John 7:52, sometimes it is tucked away at the very end of John after chapter 21, and in a family of manuscripts, it is actually inserted into the Gospel of Luke.
It is literally a story looking for a home.
Coupled with severe stylistic differences from the rest of John's gospel, different vocabulary, different sentence structures, it becomes clear this passage was not part of John's original writing at that specific spot.
This raises a really practical question. Do we always have a clear, definitive answer? What about situations where the evidence is perfectly split right down the middle?
The researchers bring up Luke 10:1, where Jesus sends out the disciples. Some manuscripts say he sent 70, others say he sent 72.
Oh, I've seen both of those in different translations.
Yeah, because both numbers have immense ancient manuscript support across different families. Furthermore, both numbers have strong symbolic associations in Jewish tradition regarding the nations of the world.
So what does a textual critic do when they hit a wall like that? Do they just flip a coin?
They admit an honest non-licet, which is Latin for, "it is not clear." The evidence is evenly divided.
That takes some humility.
It does. This is a crucial point because it displays the humility required in this discipline. Our salvation does not hang on a single digit. We can acknowledge a minor historical uncertainty without the entire foundation of the text crumbling. We do not have to panic.
So why does all this meticulous, granular academic labor matter for the average person sitting in a pew on Sunday morning? Is the textual critic just an academic sitting in an ivory tower? Or are they acting as a guard against ideological edits across history?
The source material argues a definitive yes to the latter. The documents outline how textual stability directly impacts major doctrines. If the text is fluid, theology becomes fluid. The text acts as an anchor.
Let's look at the doctrinal implications laid out in the documents. The first one is the concept of cessationism and the closed canon.
The argument presented here is that the miraculous gifts, including direct extra-biblical revelations from God, ceased with the apostolic era. Therefore, the written word is the sole authority for the church today.
Having a rigorously verified, historically fixed text protects the church from individuals who pop up claiming to have received new private revelations.
Yes. If the boundaries of the text are fixed and historically verified, new charismatic claims are instantly invalidated. You cannot add to a closed, verified document.
The sources also connect this textual precision to dispensational clarity, specifically the theological distinction between national Israel and the church. Now, this is a very specific theological framework, but the authors make the case that textual criticism directly supports it. How does that work?
The researchers argue that some scribes throughout history lacked a proper understanding of the distinct programs for Israel and the church. Because of this, they would occasionally introduce ecclesiastical glosses, church-related terms, into the text to merge the two entities.
Oh, I see.
The argument is that maintaining the exact original Greek syntax, especially in the Pauline epistles, stops later interpreters from spiritualizing literal promises given to ethnic Israel. The exact wording preserves those distinct covenantal frameworks. The syntax holds the theology in place.
The documents also mount a strong defense against modern social ideologies. The authors argue that a stable text rejects things like critical race theory and liberal evolutionary theories of how the text developed. We're just reporting what the sources say here, but what is their rationale?
The source asserts that the Bible is not a battlefield of competing social power dynamics. Modern secular academia often views ancient texts as documents where different factions fought for dominance, editing and redacting the text to suit their political needs over centuries.
Like it's just a political tool.
Right. But this research asserts the opposite. It views the text as a unified divine revelation, given by inspiration and preserved by God's sovereign hand, not by socio-political struggles or class warfare.
And there was a strong point made about complementarianism as well.
Yes. The practice of rigorous textual criticism resists modern egalitarian attempts to alter the text. The sources argue forcefully against introducing gender-neutral language, obscuring masculine pronouns, or modifying the syntax of verses like 1 Timothy 2.12 to fit contemporary sensibilities.
So the goal of the textual critic and the translator is to transmit the text as it was originally written, regardless of whether it offends modern ideological filters.
Absolutely, which leads to a strict, absolute rejection of something called conjectural emendation.
Conjectural emendation, what is that?
It is a practice very common in classical secular scholarship. If a manuscript of Homer or Plato is corrupted or unreadable, the scholar just makes an educated guess about what the ancient author probably wrote, even without any physical manuscript evidence to back it up.
They just invent a reading that sounds right?
Right. But the sources insist biblical critics must never do this. To suggest the original reading has been entirely lost from all the thousands of extant Greek manuscripts, the early Latin and Syriac versions, and the thousands of quotations from the early church fathers is to deny the providential preservation of God.
If there is no manuscript support for a reading, a human critic has no right to invent one out of thin air. The text is received, not created.
Well said.
To see the end goal of all this intense linguistic and historical work, our sources provide some expository deep dives. This shows how a preserved text fuels passionate preaching. It's not just about dry academics, it is about the pulpit. Let's look at 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 22 through 25.
Yeah.
Paint a picture of what is happening when Peter writes this.
Peter is writing to persecuted believers. These are exiles facing the horrific state-sponsored wrath of the Roman Emperor Nero. They are terrified, marginalized, and facing death.
A really bleak situation.
Very bleak. So Peter writes to them to ground their reality. He points out to them that human flesh and human empires are like withering grass, but the word of the Lord remains forever. He grounds their identity not in social reform or political rebellion, but in the eternal security of their new birth through that word.
There's a fascinating textual variant in verse 22. Peter commands them to love one another sincerely, stating that they have purified their souls in obedience to the truth. But the later Byzantine manuscripts add a phrase, through the Spirit.
When you apply the transcriptional rules we discussed earlier, it is pretty clear what happened. The Byzantine scribes, reading Peter's raw command, wanted to make sure readers knew it was the Holy Spirit doing the purifying.
They didn't want anyone thinking this is a works-based purification.
Right, so they added a theological gloss to clarify the theology. But the older, stricter Alexandrian texts omit that phrase entirely.
So the shorter reading is original.
Spot on. The shorter reading inherently implies the Spirit's work without needing the redundant addition. Peter's raw, concise syntax was perfectly sufficient. The scribes tried to help Peter out, but Peter did not need their help.
The sources also highlight an incredible Christological shift in verse 25. Peter quotes the Old Testament, specifically the Greek Septuagint translation of Isaiah 40, which contrasts the withering grass with the eternal word.
In the original Greek translation of Isaiah, the text reads, "The word of our God stands forever," using the Greek equivalent for Elohim. But Peter deliberately alters the quotation as he writes his letter. He changes "our God" to "the Lord," using the specific Greek word kyrios.
Why does that matter so much?
Because in the very next breath, Peter identifies that very word with the gospel preached to them. By using kyrios, Peter is taking the eternal Jehovah of Isaiah's ancient prophecy and directly identifying him as the Lord Jesus Christ.
The eternal word that does not wither is Christ himself.
Yes. That is the kind of massive theological connection that relies on precise textual preservation. If a scribe alters that word, the entire Christological connection vanishes.
Let's turn to the second expository example, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 14 through 17. Paul tells Timothy to continue in what you have learned.
Consider the setting. Paul is writing from a cold prison cell, facing imminent execution. He is writing to Timothy, a younger minister who is surrounded by false teachers, cultural pressure, and doctrinal instability.
Paul tells Timothy not to seek out novel ideas or innovative philosophies, but to remain anchored in the sacred writings he has known since childhood.
And Paul uses a very specific, brilliant compound word to describe those writings, theopneustos.
That is a great word.
It is a magnificent Greek word meaning God-breathed. It points to the divine origin of the text. The scriptures are literally the exhaled breath of God. Because they have this divine source, they possess a unique, intrinsic capability to make a person wise unto salvation and equip them for every good work. They carry the very authority of the one who breathed them out.
But the documents make a huge point about the human chain of custody in this passage. Timothy did not just find a glowing Bible under a rock. Verse 14 says he knows from whom he learned it.
Right. Paul specifically points to the human mediators. Timothy learned these scriptures from his grandmother Lois, his mother Eunice, and the Apostle Paul himself. He received the divine word through trustworthy, accountable human beings.
The divine breath was carried by human lungs.
That is a beautiful way to say it.
This connects the entire discussion together beautifully. Modern textual criticism is simply the continuation of that faithful historical chain of transmission.
That is the whole point of the discipline. The scholars analyzing papyri under microscopes today, comparing syntax and evaluating isolips, they are sitting in the exact same chain of custody as Lois and Eunice. They are taking the received deposit, guarding it against historical corruption, and handing it intact to the next generation. They are stewards of the breath of God.
This has been a massive scope to cover today. We have gone from secular dictionary typos and 17th century English variants to analyzing ancient papyrus scraps in the Egyptian desert. We have looked into the psychological tendencies of tired scribes working by candlelight, and we have seen how these minute, granular details of Greek syntax build a massive wall that protects major doctrines from modern ideological interference.
And the synthesis of all this information is that the goal of textual criticism is not to achieve some sterile mechanical perfection. The goal is to gratefully receive a highly documented, historically grounded truth. God used the messy, analog reality of human history, the tired eyes, the ink-stained hands, the geographical spread of the early church, to keep the core message totally intact.
The transmission process is deeply human, but the preservation is entirely providential.
It is an incredible paradox. You look closely at the flaws and you end up seeing the providence.
Here's a thought to ponder as we wrap up. If the creator of the universe chose to entrust the most vital message in human history to the fragile medium of papyrus and the tired ink-stained hands of human copyists, what does that say about how he views? He views the messy analog reality of our own lives in today's hyperspeed, digitally perfected world. Until next time, keep thinking critically.